So, ideally, the purpose of today is another campfire chat. So we're here, me, Toby, again with Kathy, Jackson of Cornered Cat, and Rory Miller. Both of us being completely underdressed for the occasion. Apologies for that. The lack of hair, makeup, and wardrobe. We'll do better next time. What we're thinking about today with the campfire chats, as we know, it's just an opportunity for us to kind of just kind of game a lot of stuff around instead of just getting down to nitty gritty specifics, and to impart, our views and thoughts on some things in a shorter period of time, and just in a nicer format. So, to keep it fairly open and wide today, we were just going to talk about our thoughts on training, looking at our respective backgrounds and specialisations, but also keeping it to the broad strokes. So even though Roy's on the Force Decisions, Violence Dynamics, Kathy's far more on the firearms, and myself on the wilderness survival, we don't want to delve necessarily into the specifics of the subjects that we teach, more just our thoughts on instruction in our various fields and what we think on that. So I actually sketched out a few questions, and we'll just kind of take them in turn and just kind of kick it between us and see what we're all thinking. So I think a nice place to start is what got us into teaching. And I'll start with you, Roy, because you keep looking at me like that.
Okay. The unarmed stuff, the real reason I got into teaching, I didn't have a lot of interest in it. But I got to a point where I didn't have anyone that wanted to play the game I wanted to play at the level I wanted to play it. And so I realized if I ever wanted to have playmates again, I was going to have to make them, because I wasn't going to find them off the shelf.
Okay.
For me, it was money. And that you can't make a fortune teaching. But I was trading, helping at the back of the line in the lower end classes so that I would be able to afford the upper end classes. It was actually a barter deal that we had worked out. After I started teaching, at first it was simply coaching at the back. But after I started, I realized what a crying need there is for competence in instruction. There's a lot of bad instruction out there, and I thought, well, I can sweep in front of my own front door and maybe help that part of the world be clean, and that was it.
Very cool. And from my perspective, ever since I started work, I was in formal instructional roles right from the sort of sporting origins, and the wilderness survival came in where it was never my intention to teach. It was my biggest passion, and I'm a firm believer that the way to kill your enjoyment of something is make a business. But I just got so many friends stacking up on me saying, because of what I did differently, I really needed to share it to a greater circle. So it started just kind of hanging out with friends, and then kind of formalised from there, and kind of grew into the actual sort of full-time instructional role. So, yeah. With that in mind, obviously we're seeing a huge dynamic change coming or occurring in the marketplace, I think on sort of twofold. One is, certainly I see in my remit of the survival, like the kind of saturation levels coming to the market now. It's kind of come back into the mainstream again. The survival kind of community follows this sort of pretty routine 15, 20 year cyclical nature of it kind of becomes popular, and then weird things happen and it drops off. But the biggest change, of course, is the kind of whole online side of things as well. Whereas now, instead of just kind of having the internet as archives and catalogues, it's becoming far more a dynamic kind of school or tuition place with the advent of YouTube and things like that. Everybody kind of uploading their instructionals. So what are your thoughts on what, if any, place does online learning have? Because it's not going to go away anytime soon. And of course, we've all got our individual views. So I'm just going to throw it open. What do we reckon?
You go first.
Yeah, let me take this one to begin with.
I would rather take to the heart at the end.
Whenever my grandpa would get cut off in traffic, he would shake his fist and then he would mumble, "Where'd that guy learn how to drive? Correspondence school?" When we are talking about the physical skills of self-defense, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we're trying to learn by watching a video, by reading a book, by reading an article or a website. We're doing ourselves a disservice if we think we can learn the physical skill that way. It makes as much sense to say, okay, you can learn how to shoot a gun by watching a video, as it does to say, well, I can learn how to water ski by watching a video. Or for you, teaching the physical elements of self-defense. Now, that said, I think all three of us can agree that when it comes to survival skills, self-protection, self-defense, there's a huge component that is not physical. There's a huge component that is emotional, social, psychological, legal, definitely legal. Lots of elements that are not physical. Those elements can and should be taught in other ways. Finally, having said that, I will add that the personal involvement of an instructor is, I think, maybe critical to the development of the right attitude toward self-defense, self-protection. Without that personal touchstone, I think a lot of the right attitudes, the good attitudes toward it that are going to tend to help you toward survival, a lot of those attitudes are caught rather than taught.
Right.
And that requires the personal touch.
And my take on it, everything you said is absolutely true. We have more potential to put out information in more ways than ever before. It's not like you can pick up a book and look at some crappy black and white pictures of some technique. You can actually watch someone who's good at it film it. So there's good information out there, more information than ever before. There's also more crap than ever before. But the part that actually bothers me most about video learning and distance learning is the percentage of population that are living so much in their heads that they read books about nature instead of going out in nature. They watch things on TV and think that they understand it. They've seen it, so they think that they can do it. And in a way, a lot of the things that are happening online are not learning. They're excuses not to learn while feeling like you are. And I put it sometimes right up there with, visualize world peace works about as well for world peace as visualizing safe driving does for safe driving. You can't shut your eyes and I'm gonna think about driving safe. You're gonna get in wrecks. So it's that whole, and I know I'm gonna, kids these days. But
He says, rocking his chair back and forth with his coffee mug in his hand.
Well, I don't have the shotgun and I'm wearing pants, so I'm not all the way there. But it's made this perfect storm of people to think that they have full lives who have nothing on the physical scale and believe that they're contributing because they're emoting, not because they're accomplishing anything. And it basically has taken a huge percentage of our population, and on their own, by themselves, they put themselves in a box where they aren't interfering with anybody and are pretty much just a drag on civilization. So, online learning is one of the easiest ways to segregate out the people that will always be useless.
I think pragmatically for me, I see huge pros and cons in it. Online learning, I'm a big fan of for the imparting of knowledge and principles. The biggest advantage I see actually with the kind of video-based and online learning is the ability for the student to watch it again and again and again.
Oh yes.
When you're
huge.
sat at a seminar, especially when you're doing the big talks for the theory part, they're getting it like one time. And a lot of the time for me, if I use myself as a sort of model, I'm taking my notes and by the sheer virtue I'm writing things down, I'm missing things that are going on. So that ability to kind of have a talk that's possibly very nuanced or detailed and just be able to replay it, certain sections, rewind, fast forward, that's kind of huge. But I also clearly believe online learning is not a substitute for practical attendance on physical courses. It can take you to a point. It can give you a good backstop to go back from a course and kind of keep you motivated, incentivized, or for you to kind of relearn or learn to a deeper level if it's done in a good manner. But there's always going to be that time that you kind of need to step on the mat or get out in the woods or whatever the case may be. That would be the advantages. I think the disadvantages, very much like you're sort of saying, it's very easy to fool yourself into believing you're at a level of competence you're not, especially with the absence of a mentor or instructor to coach, correct, verify or state where your skill level's actually at. And I use the example, and I will name no names, but one student came on a course of mine. At the beginning I said, what if any experience do you have? And his very confident reply was he'd watched every episode of a certain Survivor TV personality and therefore knew his stuff. As opposed to the guy sat next to him who had attended 11 separate physical courses with 4 different instructors. Now, I'm not saying that guy didn't have any knowledge. He had some good observations and some good ideas, but he'd never actually been in a situation to apply anything. And more importantly, had never practiced. He firmly believed because he'd seen a demonstration, he would be able to perform the same thing. And I think this is the danger on the online side. Sorry, we as instructors can demo, but all we can hope for is mimicry in our students using that format. And you see this. I mean, there's some fantastic videos out there, especially of kids with musical instruments that are like self-taught, that have just copied the piece they've seen on a YouTube video, whatever the case may be. But that doesn't mean they're musicians. It just means they're very skilled at mimicking the action that they've seen, potentially.
Can I give you an illustration of
I'd love
that?
you to.
This is completely outside of any of our particular spheres. But as a small child, I asked my dad if I could sit on his lap and steer the car. And this is, I'm ancient, remember. This is back in the day when it was okay for kids to do things like that. So I'm sitting on Daddy's lap. I'm about 6 years old. And as soon as I got onto his lap, he said, okay, we're just going to go down the street. We're going all of maybe 10 miles an hour, maybe 15 miles an hour. And I take the steering wheel and I'm doing this with it to make the car go straight. And my dad says to me, that's not how you make it go straight. But every time I had ever been in a car, I had seen that the driver does this and the car goes straight. I had no concept of what it was that the driver was actually doing when you see them moving the wheel. I did not know that they were constantly making tiny little corrections to keep the car going straight. So I just mimicked this action, and of course the car is swerving all over the road as a result of this. Mm-hmm. I think, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that's what you're talking about when you talk about mimicking the actions,
yes,
but completely missing the point.
Yes, and I think that's very easy to do, because exactly like you were saying, without that lack of of interaction with an instructor, it's how do you and as an instructor, we all know we've got flaws in our demos, and most of the time we'll caveat it, because of injury, because of this, because of whatever. Guys, I'm doing it this way, but you do what feels good for you. Mm-hmm. And so in the absence of that, it becomes the mimicry becomes kind of quite an issue in my mind. Okay, again, sorry guys, I'm conscious of time because we've got a lot to whiz through, so I think that's just kind of a nice kind of collection on our various thoughts on the online side of things. So going back to the kind of the physical and the practical, we're all teaching pretty much full time, as well as many other things. I find quite often, especially going back to the point I made before, I said there's two big dynamic changes. One is the advent of the internet, and two is we're seeing explosions in the firearms community, the wilderness survival community, the self-defense community. And we've got to acknowledge we get frustrated as instructors on various things. And I think I'm interested to kind of put out there and share with people what potentially some of the frustrations we find or come across or kind of deal with, whether it be in actual kind of class content and material and student interactions, or just seeing trends in the marketplace. And I'll give you an illustration from my world sort of on that one, that there's this kind of very accepted format of like a 1 to 2 day survival course. It's on a weekend, it's when people are sort of off work and they want to kind of go out and relax, enjoy themselves. But that's actually an incredibly small time frame to try and cover in a well-rounded manner the basics of wilderness survival. So my frustration is you're tending to be running through the foundations really quickly, which doesn't set you up for conducive sort of competence later on, because naturally once a student's done a basic course, they want to go to the next level straight away, and it's difficult to convince them, actually guys and girls, really with that timeline you need to be doing a basic course 2 or 3 times before you're remotely near understanding the foundations, the concepts, the principles, and being able to practically apply that in various circumstances. So time constraint is always a big one for me. But I fully appreciate people won't take a week off work to go do a basic survival course, so it's my job as an instructor to kind of game around that. But it's also people's perception of, and I think this ties into the online world a little bit, how fast they think they can learn something. And I always say on the survival skills, they're very simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy. And there's so much nuance in there, and so much that can change with weather, with topography, with environment, with the group, that you never light the same fire twice almost. And it's the exposure to those different circumstances that gives you competence. So time constraint is a big frustration of mine, and I'm just kind of really curious in your respective kind of worlds, or just being students as well as instructors as we are, what else you come across?
I think one of the things that I have constantly dealt with is the the balance between competence and confidence. When we're talking about survival skills, which self-defense is, there's a certain level of confidence that you want your students to have, whether or not they are confident. Now, for you doing the wilderness stuff, it may be different. I do not know. I do know that there's a selection process that criminals go through. They read people's confidence levels. And it happens that even a false confidence can, doesn't necessarily, but can be an aid to that. We know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. I believe everybody here is, which basically unskilled and unaware of it. The study shows that the people with the lowest level of competence in any given skill tend to estimate their skills as being above average, sometimes well above average. Flip side of that, the people who are well above average often estimate their own confidence or own competence to be at the 50th percentile or below. This has huge implications for us. If we want to keep our students moving forward in competence, we have to show them, hey, you know what? You're actually way down here. There's so much more. But as soon as we do that, their confidence level is going to drop. I don't necessarily want their confidence level to drop. I simply want to start bringing their competence up. And so for me, that's a constant struggle. As with you, you know, I find the time constraints of a weekend is just unbearable at times. You know, you're trying to cram 80 hours of material into a 16-hour class, and it's just tough.
My turn, huh? Within the field, I think the biggest thing is that people are selling answers without looking at the problem.
Oh, yes.
They're telling people what to do. And when you've got, you know, a massively huge guy who's been training for 30 years telling a small older person who's having a one weekend how to handle a problem, they tend not to be looking at the student's point of view. And if you haven't studied bad guys, some of the stuff that you're teaching is probably inaccurate. When people are bringing military arts and trying to adapt them for self-defense, it's about killing an enemy. This is not about civilian self-defense. When they take older stuff, because the basic breakdowns, most of the arts are pretty efficient, or either pretty old. That's how we know they're efficient, they've lasted so long. Or military arts, because they need to be efficient. And other than almost all the other ones I know that I'm really think are effective were invented by criminals. And those have to be adapted a little bit. So when people are using bad source information, or they aren't questioning their source information, or they're trying to adapt instead of looking at what they need, I find that incredibly frustrating. Tactical shooting is unrelated to defense shooting.
Breach it.
It's tactical shooting is what bad guys would use if they were being smart. But the actual making a draw under close contact fighting is not what we did when we stacked up on a door and came in. Just different.
It's a different skill set, a different context.
Right, and
Yeah.
when you try to take something from that skill set and context, because you can be really, really good at A, and well, I'm really, really good at A, so maybe I can teach B too, is like hiring a really, really good jet fighter to teach your submarine people how to drive their submarines. It's, you know, they're good, but it's not the same skill. So that's one of the frustrations, one of the huge ones. Time constraints, I spend more time trying to show people how to think than what to do. And that allows me to get around that a little bit. And it's one of the things I like about the way you teach survival too, is you're what's your word, non-prescriptive.
Yeah. So with everything we're talking about so far, we're kind of, we're doom and glooming the instructors trade, it would seem. Why do we all do this? There's no money and it's just full of frustrations and hellacious kind of... But of course, we do it for a reason, and most of us because it's born out of a passion and a you know, pride, for want of a better word. So I think it's really nice to kind of share and highlight what are some of the highlights or the greatest rewards we actually get from teaching, and this can be either sort of during the course when we engage with students, or just like an overarching, you know, sense of sort of benefit.
I think it's Rory's turn first this time.
Okay.
The two best moments recently were watching a lady in her early 60s take a 6'2", multiple black belt, spin him through the air, and soccer kick his head in a scenario training because he went after her daughter. That was incredible. And the other one is watching someone teach something that you know that they had no idea existed a year ago, and watch someone teach it better than you do, and that's one of the
Yes.
best moments as an instructor ever.
Yeah, I'm going to second that one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think for me, there've been a couple of things. I get people who say, "Well, have you ever gotten the call from a student who saved her life by shooting somebody?" It's like, no, 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 no. That's not the one that I'm hoping for and living for. The one that gets me is when I get an email from somebody who says, "You taught me something about how to avoid trouble."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, man, the best story is the one that never happened.
Yeah.
There's also that moment at the end of class where, we do the end of class wrap up, and one of the students says, "Wow, I never knew how much there was to learn about this. I'm going to keep learning." It's like, for me, if I can spark that thing right there, my job is done. Because once they're asking the questions, they're going to find the answers. So I think a lot of my job is simply to encourage them to ask the questions for themselves, looking for the knowledge for themselves. It's a whole lot easier to prepare a good meal for people who are hungry than it is to try to force feed people who are not.
I'm sort of twofold on this, and I'm exceptionally fortunate in a lot of the courses I teach. In that 99% of the time we're going to be dealing with firelighting, which is that kind of real Neanderthal skill, and there's just something about how enthused and excited students get when they're firelighting, especially if, and bear in mind now, there's a lot of people that have not lit fires. They didn't have it in their background, in their childhood. The closest they've come is like a stovetop, and most of those are electric now. So sort of getting that, gathering natural material and setting it on fire, and then sitting around and basking in the glow of the accomplishment, and the childlike enthusiasm, and I say that's a very positive thing, that kind of just washes over that person and that group when we're doing that, is immensely rewarding to me as an instructor. And then that whole dynamic shift about when people have given themselves permission, as the phrase you would use, Rory, to go outdoors and enjoy themselves, just to detach themselves from normal life, switch off the phone, not check the email, although with smartphones that's becoming increasingly difficult, but to just take time out and just reconnect a little with nature, and you just see, even over a day or two, weights being lifted off people's shoulders, and first and foremost, that's an incredible privilege to sort of mentor part of that journey, but also the upshot is I get a lot of very positive student feedback, not necessarily on the skills and techniques, more than just the experience of, it was great just to be out. I need to do this more often, and especially parents, I need to be getting my kids to do this more often.
Yes.
And it's like, yes, there's huge merit to just being out in nature. The skills are great, the techniques are valid, but just being out is almost as important. And so, yeah, like I say, it's a privilege for me to kind of get exposed to that all the time. Perfect. One last question we've got time for, I think, and then unfortunately we're done for the day. We've been doing this a while now, and I'm aware, because of the market trends, there's a lot of new instructors kind of arriving onto the market now, or people sort of diversifying. I see this a lot with the emerging trends of, and I think MMA sort of really started to spawn where you needed to be good at more than one thing to be sort of valid or trying to teach nowadays. So people are sort of branching out from necessarily the traditional routes or backgrounds into different subjects, and maybe struggling at various levels with that. What, if any, kind of top tips or advice do you think we can kind of share with newer aspiring instructors to kind of, what would you like somebody to tell you 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago as you started your kind of instructional journey?
You made me start last time. It's your turn.
Okay, first of all, any type of self-defense or survival skills, self-preservation skills, people's lives are in your hand. That is the first thing I want any prospective instructor to know. You are not simply teaching somebody, okay, this is how you load and fire a gun. You are actually giving them the skills that will save their lives some dark night when there's nobody else around. And they will be 100% responsible for what they do. And what they do is going to be based on what you told them. I want, if you think about that as an instructor, that's a tremendously heavy burden. It doesn't mean that you're responsible for their choices, but it absolutely means that you are 100% responsible for what you tell them. If you give them bad advice, if you leave big blanks in your instruction without telling them that there are blanks there that they need to fill in, if you give them advice that comes from bad sources, all of those things, those are on your head. On the other hand, when you tell them the things that are right and that are good and that are true, when you put it in context and help them find the holes in their own training that they can fill in, you can help save lives. That's the ultimate. That's the bottom line. Once you, as an instructor, once you have that, everything else is gravy. Everything else, all the little tips and tricks and techniques and tools, all of those follow naturally once you have the goal in mind.
Good. And follow up on that. It's not about you. It's about the student.
Yes.
If you want to teach because you want to be called a teacher, or if you want to be called a master, you're doing it for the wrong reason. You need to get out there before you get people hurt. If you're doing it for anything about you, if it's about you, you're doing it wrong. And you can do it because you love it. You can do it because it makes you feel happy. You can do all that. But when you're sitting there, you're looking at that student, and it's about what the student needs, not what you want to give, not what you have, what you want to show off. Each student needs different stuff. And it's my line between martial arts and self-defense. In martial arts, I'm teaching subject matter. Self-defense, I'm teaching students. And self-defense is about the student, always and forever. If it's more important for you to keep your technique pure than to make it so that two different people can use it, because the two different people will not be able to use it the same way, then you aren't doing it for the right reasons. If you, for whatever reason, need to make sure that your students know that you're better than they are, the only reason to get into this is to make people who can take you out. If you cannot make someone dangerous to you, or your ego is too strong to let them be better than you, you are creating victims. You are not creating survivors. And that's stuff that you've got to watch all the time. Your job is to take someone and make them better than you. And if it's about anything other than that, you need to, respectfully as possible, you need to go shoot yourself in the fucking head and leave your students alone.
Twofold thought for me as well. And it's kind of a consolidation of what you guys have just highlighted there. As an instructor, you're still a student. You always have to be learning. And I have this heavy caveat for myself. The day I turn around and say, there's nothing else I can learn, is the day I quit teaching.
Yes.
The onus on me is to continuously improve, refine, research, develop. And that ties into the second point. And if I look at when I started teaching, if I had a time machine and could kind of go back and tell myself something, don't be afraid to develop and improve your training programs. Because for actually a long time, I taught the accepted template knowing it could be better, but being terrified to change it on the basis I would be saying the person I got the template from, my instructors, weren't that good because I found a way to modify it. Whereas actually the modifications weren't necessarily about the technique. There was no flaw, there was limitations, but it was about so I could be more comfortable delivering it. Because how one person teaches is very different how another person teaches. And I stifled and frustrated myself for a very long time just following the script. And the moment I allowed myself to say, hey, you know what, you can add things, you can change things, you can take it away, and you can definitely adapt it in real time to your students' needs, instead of like, we've got to tick these boxes. It's like, you've got that, so we don't need an hour of practice, we can move on to that. Or like, hey, you know what, we're not going to move on because you haven't got the skill yet, and it's the most critical thing that you need right now. So that kind of being dynamic in an instructional session, for me, is something I didn't do for a long time. I do constantly now to the stage I almost run courses in courses, depending on student need. And that was just massively liberating and necessary. And the difference in the standard my students put out now is chalk and cheese. And this isn't a disservice to the students I had before, but as a younger instructor, I was putting out people that could replicate my demonstration, whereas I now put out people that own the skills I've shown them and understand what they need to do to make it work.
Okay, and part of that advice for new instructors It doesn't matter your technical competence. The ability to teach is a separate skill.
Yes.
And you
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you have to study teaching, be as dedicated to teaching as you were to acquiring the skill in the first place that you are teaching. Changing what your instructors did, especially it's endemic in martial arts, things have been taught the same way for a very, very long, well, not actually that long a time. They didn't actually teach that way in the old days. But they've been taught that way, and people think that's the only way to teach. And we know so much more about teaching and learning, especially teaching adults.
Human knowledge is always expanding.
And you can become far more effective as a teacher than your teachers were. And it's not hard, especially if they weren't studying the teaching aspect of it.
I want to point out that the flexibility that you talk about, being able to teach the group of people in front of you, being able to look at the individual student and say, this is what this student needs right now, that is something that only comes to somebody who has that lifelong commitment to learning. It's not something that if you have always taught within a very rigid paradigm, you can manage that for years and years and years, but you'll never be able to move outside that until the day you say, okay, I'm going to learn as much about this field as I possibly can. And you might not be learning about that field in order to be able to flex, but you won't be able to flex until you've gotten knowledge that goes much deeper and much wider than the outline.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Wrap up.
We're going to have to. But what I just want to say is for the people watching this, obviously thanks for taking the time. And, you know, we've gone through sort of 4 or 5 questions, and hopefully the knowledge and experience is useful. But just review those and think on them yourselves as well. That's the important part about this whole process. We're not just in the campfire chats just to kind of espouse our opinion, but again, it's just to bring things to the surface that we think are important for people to be thinking about. So, you know, all our contact details are clearly visible. So if you want to pick up on individual points, then you can. But that's it. Thanks for the time, guys.
Cool. Thank you.
If the zombies kill everyone in Georgia, you just got to kick down the door in a random house and look in the bedroom. You'll get ammunition.
He's telling the truth.
Yeah, and I get it. So
It's just,
hence my questions.
yeah.
All right, you guys can go whatever you want.
Okay.
Do give me a good clap, Kathy.
No, I can't.
Give me a good clap, Rory.
I don't want to hear about your social
There you go.
issues.
Not an applause. I need a single spike on the audio.
Ready? Yeah?
Go.
No, that was bad. Bad. I'm not good at this. Yeah, that's not something we did in Sensei school.
Okay,
You used to like it in
fine.
somebody's face or something.
That being the case,
Sounds
here,
totally different. Why am I?
hold my coffee and watch
Whatever.
this. Are we ready?
Yep.
Okay.
You're good.
That sounded like someone popping a bubble. Not a very big bubble either.
Okay, let me explain what the purpose of that spike was. It's from that point on is where he's going to cut. So we make the spike, and then we wait a second, and then we have our conversation.
Your point. Which we've already had a conversation now, so you're gonna have to do it again. So it doesn't know where to cut now.
It's